Well, hello everyone. It's really good to see you, and I think this is our first show of the new year. For many of you who have been getting dumped on with snow, we got a little bit here in Boston today. But we'd like to welcome you to the KBE Insider, and there was actually a new release today with some new content on the KBE site. You should definitely go check it out. But we have, as the kind of premise of the show, what we do is like to tell you a little bit about what we think is going to be happening in the Kubernetes community kind of in the future. And the way we do that is by interviewing the people who actually do the work. As many of you know, especially if you've ever been involved with Red Hat, in the open source world, you don't always get the pizza that was ordered, as they say. You get the what the developers think is the most relevant things, it's always interesting, right? Because the cool thing about open source is that if you really want to see a feature happen, you can work on it on nights and weekends, even if it's not strictly kind of where your kind of business model is going. So that's always kind of fun, and so we end up with a lot of cool stuff. So today I am welcoming Daniel O once again to help me host the show. And Chris Short is our guest. But Daniel, you want to introduce yourself real quick? And then Chris, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thanks, Langdon. Hi, Daniel O. I'm from Boston, like Langdon, and then I'm working for Red Hat as a developer advocate and also, former CNCF ambassador. We got to launch a new CNCF ambassador. I'm pretty sure that Chris will really talk about the CNCF ambassador stuff as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm pretty much focused on Java and the Kubernetes and the serverless and a bunch of the new technology around like a cloud native application stuff. I'm going to hand it over to Chris.
Hey, everybody. I'm Chris Short. I live in Detroit, and I work as a developer advocate for AWS right now on the EKS team. If you're not familiar with EKS, it's our Kubernetes solution. Much like OpenShift, we have all the bells and trimmings that you could possibly want to plug in, and so forth, so on. But I'm also an upstream contributor, and I've been around the community since 2017. So yeah, been here a long time now.
Yeah, that's a bit.
Yeah.
I was really excited to go to Detroit, for KubeCon, I think did we meet for the first time in person there?
I think so. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
And but I was just I was really kind of struck by like how different the city was compared to when I was there. Let's not date myself, some time ago for some sales calls many companies ago. I was pleasantly surprised and had some really good food, and I really appreciate good
the
food.
city has changed a lot in the 6 years now that I've lived here. I mean, and compared to like 2007 when my wife graduated, college and moved down to North Carolina for a little while, like it's completely different, right? Like Blight is so early 2000s, essentially. It's been cleaned up, revitalized, and they're smart. They're going from the core outward of the city and improving things. But yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff here in Detroit now. We're working.
I really appreciate
driving the whole 9 yards. Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate the big move in cities in general for local artists doing murals on the side of buildings.
Oh yeah,
and
we're
Detroit
big on
that. Has a really good example of that. I wish Boston had more of it.
We actually have a whole parking deck where every level is a different mural inside it. It's pretty cool.
Oh really? Oh, that's kind of cool.
It was
I
like
didn't
built,
see that.
and then an artist came in and did the whole thing, but like different murals on every level, so you can remember which level you're on. Like one's all lemons or something,
Yeah, right. One of the things they do in Boston actually is, I think they're transformers, but you see they're on the street, not the ones up on the towers, but the ones that are kind of
the big boxy ones.
Yeah, they actually give a little bit of a stipend to local artists to paint those.
Nice.
Which I think is pretty slick. I'd like to see a lot more of those. And they're a little, what's kind of cool is they tend to, they're small, right? So you get a lot of them kind of in the same density. But I really like the big murals as well. So kind of moving on to Kubernetes, which is, what we're here for. We wanted to invite you to the show to talk a little bit about the Contributor Summit.
Yeah, sure.
What is it? and when is it coming up? And then I think there's some, what I still love, FOSDEM's terminology, the FOSDEM fringe, and so there's some fringe conferences as well. So once you have a pretty heavy duty conference, you get some smaller ones that kind of start to wrap around it, take advantage of all the people.
Yeah, so KubeCon EU this time is going to be a little bit different than previous KubeCons. If you've been to a bunch of them, which I know a lot of people have not, I'm fortunate in that way, you might recall when all of a sudden we had these day zero events, and then all of a sudden there were 2 day zeros. Well, we're fixing that in EU. Thankfully, we're going to squish it down to 1 day zero. Most folks are doing their thing on Mondays, or the Monday of the conference, and then Tuesday the conference officially kicks off, and we'll be doing Contributor Summit on that day, which is cool. And I shared a link, and thank you for sharing it in chat, Langdon. We're just getting started on this. Every KubeCon we try to do one of these. The only time we haven't was obviously the pandemic year. But prior to that, in San Diego, it was this massive undertaking. A lot of people, involved, and we were actually doing like training classes and everything else. And kind of post-pandemic, we realized a few things. One, it would be a lot better if you were actually a Kubernetes org member, which we can talk about in a second, to go. So we're, because we only have limited seats, and we were getting, hundreds of waiting list people, and, we're prioritizing org members first. What does it take to be a Kubernetes org member? A few PRs getting accepted and then getting sponsored in by 2 people, and you can become an official Kubernetes contributor. It's not as hard as it seems. On that same site that I just shared the link with, there's a resources section where you can start diving in how to contribute and everything if you're interested. So org members meet at this Contributor Summit to talk about all manners of things, right? And there's usually project meetings, like all the other ancillary non-Kubernetes projects, like Containerd, etcd, you can insert cloud native landscape here kind of thing. They'll have those meetings during the conference, but this one day is dedicated to Kubernetes content for contributors. So we'll have a sit down with the steering committee, for example. We might talk to the technical oversight committee from CNCF, some of those folks. The kind of agenda right now is very unconference-like, is how we're trying to set it up. So there'll be a CFP submission window that opens here soon. But the next big step for us is to get registration open, and that'll be my next communication out to the world about this. So if you're not subscribed to the Kubernetes dev mailing list and you want to get notifications for stuff like this, highly recommend it. It's on that contributor site, the kates.dev site. And what happens during these things is a lot of people just end up, we'll listen to the steering committee, and then we'll all have our meetings, right? Because there's so many special interest groups, SIGs, in Kubernetes, and they all have some project underneath it. So some project, sub-project, or working group or something like that. So for example, I'm on the Kubernetes Contributor Comms team, which falls under SIG Contributor Experience. And our job is to kind of highlight the work being done upstream, share the new features that are coming out, keep the world kind of up to date on Kubernetes contributions and events and things like that. So co-leading that team has been a very rewarding experience, and we have a hand in helping with communicating out things about the summit as well that's coming up. So it's 100% volunteer driven by Kubernetes contributors, which is the other cool thing. Like, yes, we have CNCF's help for space and logistics and that kind of stuff, but it's otherwise 100% planned by contributors, and submissions are from contributors that want to talk about new thing or how to do thing better. And if you're a contributor and you've got something you want to talk about, even if it's something as simple as like, stabilizing etcd, like submit your unconference talk, and you can talk about what you've done so far, because I know there's been a lot of work. in etcd lately to make it more rigorous. And then containerd itself, right, like always has evolutions and things. They might, we might talk about container runtimes in general. We might talk about like Docker shim when that got deprecated. That was a big topic for the whole community. But oddly enough, we put out an FAQ as part of the comms team. I worked with a few folks on an FAQ, and that FAQ is on our blog, the Kubernetes.io blog. And everything on that blog gets marked out of date after a year. So now I've got to do a contribution to make sure that entry doesn't go out of date. And then the associated things linked to it, I need to put in there like, hey, this link's here. Make sure you update things if you change this. So yeah, it's kind of this, it's an interesting like ongoing process of getting messaging out to the world, like making sure not just contributors, but even vendors understand the changes happening upstream that will impact their customers and users. Because the last thing the community wants to do is push something that just breaks everything or completely changes some model that you're used to without some kind of notice, right, through the alpha, beta stages, right? So at the conference, we talk about, what's to come. It's a good place just to, meet people, discuss ideas. I know in Detroit, I was quite busy, right? Like talking to folks. Part of that was because I was a local, but the other part of that was because there's a lot of initiatives going on, right? Like, there's a lot of folks are going to be talking about cost optimization this year. And I know I just said that weird, but getting the price of everything down in Kubernetes isn't exactly trivial. Yeah, exactly. I need to optimize my English, but my cluster is more expensive to, not optimize. So a lot of folks will be talking about that, how to run leaner clusters, that kind of thing. I feel like it'll be interesting to see what the topics are. I'm very curious given, the industry and where it's heading right now.
Yeah, I think there's a few things. One of the things we've talked about before is also the efforts that you've made within the comm kind of community, not you specifically, but the organization,
the team, yeah.
somewhat you, but about also trying to make it kind of more accessible for even, some of the best communicators are also not the best programmers, right?
Right.
So, finding ways to make it so that they can contribute content that gets distributed to the organization at large is an important and in some ways difficult subject.
Yeah, and we have a team that works on blog posts, and we have a special series called SIG Spotlights where we'll interview essentially the SIG leads for like SIG node, and like what's your biggest challenges, what big changes do you see coming forward, all kinds of questions. And you can go to the Kubernetes blog and just search SIG Spotlight, and they're all there. I think we've done 4 or 5 of them now. But they're not trivial, right? Like you have to interview a person. And we've realized very quickly, like the how to interview people for a product that is written needs to be in a written format, because it took like 6 months for us to get a blog post where I like jumped on a call and recorded it, for example, and then got a transcript. It still took a long time to do it. So the best way to kind of do these things is via email, which you go all back and forth a lot, but then you get a great, finished product talking about everything the SIG's done, what they've been doing, what they're going to be doing, that kind of thing. And that,
there's something to be said for like kind of curated content, right? Like,
right.
It's like, I like the kind of this aspect of like what we're doing here, which is kind of the streaming content, where, it's not edited, et cetera, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a place also for kind of edited content, right? So I think it depends on what you're trying to find out. It also, sometimes you want to mix up the kind of types of content you're consuming. So yeah, I definitely would agree. I was actually going to add, it's been kind of funny. It's like, now that I work in a place that has its own newspaper, actually it has 2, right?
Wow.
Because BU is quite a big university. It's like, I feel like I'm getting interviewed a lot about various things that are going on in the organization. And then I actually just had a student come by yesterday, I think, who wants to interview me for one of his for a paper he's writing in class. And I was like, Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess that's a thing. So it's been kind of entertaining.
Nice.
But so what I did want to ask you though is that we had kind of in our notes, we had kind of two different concepts. We have the Kubernetes Contributors Summit and then the Kubernetes Community Day. What is the difference? Are they essentially the same thing, but they get nicknamed back and forth, or are they two
No,
separate
so
things?
Kubernetes Community Days are like local KubeCons is kind of how I want to put it, right? Like a group of people from, say, India can put one together for Mumbai, and
Mhm.
it could be a, check all these boxes, and it's a CNCF, sponsored kind of thing where you can put together content and programming. And those community days are very helpful in getting to the folks that can't make it to KubeCon, right? And like it's more aligned towards a meetup than a big conference, for example. It's an all-day thing, but these community days are popping up more now post-pandemic. We had a ton of them right before the pandemic hit, and they were great, right? I think I went to somewhere in the South, I forget, but I went to one and it was just like, this is like the same vibe as KubeCon, but like 250 people, right?
Mhm.
So it's a much more localized, much more kind of, regional guest kind of focused thing. And those events in like the cloud native space are awesome because you realize very quickly like who's doing what with different parts of the cloud native ecosystem in your region. And you can kind of build up this awesome network of folks that are just utilizing Kubernetes, which is a lot of what I did here in Michigan when I first moved up here was link up with all the Kubernetes people in Michigan and,
Right.
be buddies with them and stuff. It's kind of one of
Yeah.
those,
Yeah.
how do you make friends as an adult? Oh, this open source project might help.
By being a nerd. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
it's actually funny. I one of the things I need to do more of is kind of because like I've kind of changed various gigs that I've worked on over the years,
Mhm.
and I need to like re-engage with the kind of Boston like tech community in general,
Yeah.
because not only do I want to be able to supply students with like internships, but I also want to be able to have students go to some of these things because I
Mhm.
don't think a lot of the kind of college students they even in a lot of ways they almost don't even see anything that happens off campus, right?
Right.
Even when we're in the middle of a big city like Boston.
Yeah.
But then on top of that, it's like the best way to get into tech really, or one of the best ways is to get recruited, right? And one of the best
Mhm.
ways to get recruited is to be involved in, some of the big open source projects, and trying to get, a student to go to a container meetup, right, or a Kubernetes meetup or something like that can be difficult
Oh,
because
I'm
it's
sure. You got to kind of
off campus.
explain the why behind it, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I was going to say about the community day, one of the things I've really always liked a lot about how DevOps Days was built,
Mhm.
right, was like, you know, because when we started the one in Boston some number of years ago, again, trying
Wow.
not to
That
date
was a while
myself.
ago. Yeah.
Yeah. It was basically like the whole setup was just kind of there and you just kind of like picked it all up and then, put your Boston local,
Mhm.
configuration on it.
Mhm.
And then off you went. It was also super handy that in those days, maybe still true, I don't know, but there were just so many vendors who were interested in sponsoring DevOps Days,
Yeah.
that, we could make the event free and, and still supply food. I think we ended up actually charging $25, I want to say. And then, but if you came, you got it back.
Oh, nice.
Basically
It was just a
as
hold
like,
your ticket kind of thing. Yeah.
right. Because, it's like the problem with a free event, right, is you get the 50% fall off and they're like
Yeah.
so hard to manage. So,
Mhm.
so we were like, why don't we do nominal fee? I don't even know if it was as much as 25, but then we'll essentially give it back to you in like gift cards,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
lunches or whatever.
No, that's cool.
Which is cool.
I
Yeah.
actually got like my big, I don't know, big moment in tech at a DevOps Days in Detroit in 2017. It was actually part of my strategy of getting a job up here so we could move up here to be closer to my wife's family,
Mhm.
as opposed to living in North Carolina and coming up here on vacation every vacation.
Right. Yeah. Right.
I did a good talk at a DevOps Days. It was my first talk, public speaking wise, ever after military service. So that was kind of nice and cool and, scary all at the same time, but it went well. got a job here, like 6 or 7 months later, and then we moved. And shortly thereafter, I was at Red Hat, and after Red Hat, I'm at AWS. It's pretty cool. I've talked at a lot of DevOps days now. I've organized DevOps days now. I've done a lot of speaking in the DevOps day space and have a great appreciation for those events. The last one I went to was Seattle, and they had that fall off problem as well. So it's like, how do you prepare for, max capacity when you have no idea what the actual people are going to show up? Right. Like,
I even hate the stupid, like kind of I think impactful, like it's very impactful, but it's like something you don't even think about. It's like, I just ordered 200 lunches and I only got 100 people. Like, what am I going to do with the extra 100 lunches?
Right.
Donation.
Smartly, the Seattle one had like all that set up with the local food bank so they could just drop it off kind of thing.
Yeah.
If I remember, that was Seattle. But just the whole event coordination thing these days is hard, like really, really hard. So that's why it takes a team of folks to put on these contributor summits, and same with the KCDs, the community days. They require a lot of effort that you don't necessarily see behind the scenes, like hardly ever.
Well,
right?
Preferably, like when it goes well, they seem like they're easy, right?
Yeah. Well, funny you say that. I have somewhere like a diagram I made of the setup we had to do in San Diego because the AV team was just like at a complete loss what to do. As far as like, we have a room with 2 projectors. How do you get the signal over to projector number 2? And that was when Apple released like the screen mirroring thing for iPad. So I just plugged in, I had the beta at the time, just so I could have that feature for the conference. So I plugged in my iPad, it was 2019, plugged in my iPad on the alternate monitor, projector, and then we just casted it over there and like, hey, AV problems done. But like stuff like that happened. That was the contributor summit where I actually submitted a pull request via audio.
Nice.
Hey, Kime's broken. It's this problem. Fix it. It's like, nice. I found this last night.
One of the first, every time I organize an event like that, one of the first volunteers I find or try to find, is somebody to do AV, because it's always so hard, hard. It is not my like skill set by default.
And like, we're putting on a Container Day event in Europe, and we're trying to get it on, the AWS live streaming services that are out there. And they're like, how are you going to give us a signal? Like, that was like question number 1. And I'm like, oh, I know how. How would you like it though?
Do you even know what all these acronyms mean?
Yeah.
So Daniel, did you want to talk a little bit about contributors contributing to the kind of no code kind of communication stuff, or did you have another question you wanted to ask?
Actually, before moving forward, that I got to add one comment around Kubernetes Contributors Summit. So, just to be clear, the Contributor Summit as a part of the Colo event in the KubeCon, which is really awesome. Because I've been doing a lot of time in the KubeCon stuff, like a track chair and then community program, things like that. And I heard a lot of people are actually some struggle so finding right track. For example, there are many tracks, like Chris already talked about that, the SIG meetup and the maintainer track, and then even Colo, even there are a bunch of stuff. But the contributor summit is a really good place for them. Not only contributor, but also like an end user. Okay, I need to really learn something new around the new, like a CNC project or some Kubernetes contributor stuff. This is might be perfect Colo event to find that kind of knowledge and then like a trend technology stuff. And this is really cool stuff. I'm really encouraging a lot of people to join the this Colo event.
And in previous years they did something weird where like day zeros cost more than whatever, and like they fixed all that to where it's like you could just register to go to the summit and you're fine. Or you can register to go to the whole thing.
There are many technical hardcore deep dive track, like a maintainer and a C group stuff. I'm pretty sure this contributor Summit is pretty much like a general thing, but also you can have some conversation in depth technology as well.
Yeah.
And then so moving forward, I got a little bit more question, just like thanks for shouting out Langdon. So can you talk a little bit more about the Kubernetes Contributor Communication project? Specifically, it's a non-code contributor. So a lot of people saying I am Kubernetes developer, which means like play with the YAML files, and then they still can say I am developers or even platform engineer. However, a lot of people doesn't have any experience about that. So how to handle like a non-code contributors with that contributor summit?
Yeah, no, this is not the container day for AWS. The contributor summit is different. That's a different day zero or pre-KubeCon event. So
something like the Backstage Con or GitOps Con. This is a colo event.
Exactly. Yeah. It's considered a colo event. It'll be on, I looked at the date, the 18th, I believe, is what we're targeting right now. I'm pretty sure that's fairly solid, but
sorry, is the contributor summit?
Yeah, the contributor summit will be on the 18th. All those day zeros like Backstage Con and Cloud Native Security Con, and those will all be on like AWS Container Day will be on day zero, which is Monday.
Okay,
so,
gotcha.
At least that's what my understanding is. About
Container Day. So Dwayne, did you mean the AWS Container Day? Did you mean a different there's another one too, which I'm blanking on the name of. Or were you talking about the Contributor Summit?
The Container Day will be the 17th. The Contributor Summit will be the 18th.
Gotcha.
When in doubt, I'm really confused. Many.
There's events. So many things.
Just go for the whole week.
Exactly,
and then just show up at the.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Is end user, attendee perspective, is just really hard to find the right one with a limited time window. And then I got a little bit more than 18 choices to go to the colo event at the same day.
Yeah. So we're trying to not have the colos overlap with the Contributor Summit this year. That has been a complaint in the past, I feel like, where I would love to go to, Backstage Con because we use that on our, Kubernetes clusters extensively. But I really want to talk about this idea I have for a Kubernetes enhancement proposal at the Contributor Summit, So a lot of folks set up their meetings for any enhancements they want to, kind of flesh out before actually submitting. They'll set that all up at the Contributor Summit. So it's one central place. No, there will not be virtual access this year just because it is very expensive to do live streaming from a big conference venue. It's not as simple as you would think.
Well, it's kind of funny. It's there's almost like a step function. Is if you have a small conference, 500 or less people or something doing virtual, it's actually
it's all one room, no problem.
Double, right? It's not too big a deal. But
I think we have 3 rooms, so that would be tough, right?
Yeah.
And the cost of it all, because you have to use that venue's staff or whoever they have contracted out. It's just a lot of money, and it's just not an expense that we think is necessary given all the other content. And plus we have an NA, there's 2 every year. And then we try to do a contributor awards at the end of the year. But sometimes that happens virtually. Sometimes that happens at KubeCon, neither here nor there. One change this year, I will say, about the Contributor Summit, and then I'll talk about Contributor Comms, which is 2 completely separate things, not to be confusing or anything. The SIG meet and greet, which I have always found is the most beneficial for people, is actually happening on Thursday this year. So you can go to the Contributor Summit, first half of the day, you don't want to do any unconferences, you need to go to meet a customer, whatever. You can still go to a SIG meet and greet if you want to figure out what SIG I want to contribute to, later in the week. So that was another thing. A lot of people learned what SIG they wanted to figure out to work with, but the SIG meet and greet had already happened because they figured it out on Wednesday and the meet and greet was on Tuesday, kind of thing, right? So pushing it later, Thursday or Friday, I can't remember which, but pushing it later in the conference gives people that opportunity to talk to other attendees and say, talk to people like me and be like, hey, this is what I do. I would like to contribute. Where can I help? I try to steer as many people in the right direction as possible. But contributor comms, it's no code-esque, right? Like we still use GitHub. We still have a process to approve tweets through GitHub, which is pretty cool. It's actually kind of broken right now because of some Node.js issues, but the ideal state will be, your GitHub issue turns into a PR, which then goes out to Twitter, right? Like there's actions, GitHub actions are involved. We're looking at integrating just straight up GitHub with Buffer, the like aggregation scheduling tool for social media. So there's a lot of use of those like Zapier, if this and that type things. And like, there's a lot of that going on within the entire SIG, that Contribx SIG that we're under. So kind of my job as a co-lead is grease the skids for everybody's work, right? Like if I need to figure out, you need a Zapier account, I go reach out to CNCF, figure out the process, and then go do it kind of thing to make it happen. And that just comes with time, I think, in the community, right? Like at this point, like I could probably lead Contribx, I feel like, if I had the time. So this year I'm kind of
make time.
Yeah, like this year I'm going to try and, line myself up to help the next group of folks when they step down. So it's one of those things where it's like, if you're in the community long enough, you kind of know where everything is. But if you're not, it could all just be over your head.
And
we totally
you're talking
understand
about
that.
Well, it's the exact same thing that you see in many organizations. It's what this is the problem with turnover, right? It's like,
right.
Is even if in the best documented place in the entire world, like, every time you lose a person and have to replace that person, there's so much to learn about the organization. That's, it's kind of true in, open source communities. It's probably true in other kinds of, let's say, external communities. I was involved in regional theater for a long time ago, and that, for example, was another thing, where you kind of had to know, how does this light board work? That's slightly different from every other light board you've ever seen. Stuff like that. So I think that's it's such. It's often a very discounted, but really important component. It's like, once people once people know where all the bits are, it's a big deal to make changes, or to like have someone leave and replace them. So I think it's really good to have, if you've got a few contributors who can provide the continuity, even if they're not the leads, they can be ridiculously valuable.
Yeah. So I dropped a link in chat to our GitHub directory, essentially, in the community repo for Kubernetes. But I mean, we have social media, we have technical leads, we have event leads that'll help with things that are happening in the community, like Contributor Summit, blog coordinators, just writers, editors, you name it. And we meet on Fridays at 11 a.m. Eastern. And we discuss all the work that's in progress, essentially, right? And a lot of it is one of those things where it's like, we need to communicate these things out at a certain time of year. Like there's some of that's scripted, and then there's the kind of release-related work, and then there's the event-related work. So there's a lot of moving pieces, right? And we try to automate as much as that as possible. So if you like to automate things from a content
you're taking pull requests.
Yeah, like feel free to join the meeting and be like, yo, I'm a Zapier expert, y'all need some help? Like, we would love it. Right. Like, or hey, I'm a great blog writer, I would love to contribute a few blogs to the contributor site or kubernetes.io blog. We can help you with that and kind of get that process going. And for the longest time, there was no coordinating, no, coalescing of resources to do this. And now that we have the functionality, it's really, really beneficial when things like Docker sham deprecation happen, or some release, needs to be has a feature that needs to be communicated well in advance, kind of thing. We can get ahead of that. And that's kind of the whole premise of the group, was we need to get ahead of some of these things. And like Docker Shim was just like the big fireworks moment for us, where it was like, yes, this group is vitally necessary, and this is the things we should be, communicated with about upcoming changes, that kind of thing. And we all try to keep aware of our various sections of, Kubernetes that we're involved in. But folks also know, like, ping us in Slack. We have a Slack channel, the whole 9 yards. Whatever you need to get out communications wise, we can make that happen. And, basically just, if this is what, tell us what you want, we do it. Done. And if it's, very specific language that you need, or you're not sure on the specific language that you need, we can help you. We don't necessarily have a style guide or anything fun like that yet, but that would be cool if we did at some point have like a Kubernetes contributor style guide. But
like
sky's the
PEP 8
limit,
for
right?
Kubernetes.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, this is what, a blog post looks like. I mean, right now it's marked down. It's not that hard. So
yeah,
it's
one thing I wanted to bring up
that kind of thing.
That was new to me as of KubeCon, actually, that I've been thinking about using in our organization. And you just mentioned it, and I was kind of curious about your thoughts on it, was Backstage. So we have, it's funny, I've been talking about it, within BU, part of my job is to actually be the technical director for this organization that does experiential learning for students. And so we do third-party projects. We go get third parties who want, software built or whatever, and then have student teams run them. Nice. But one of the things that we struggle with, right, is especially continuity. I joke, that we're a consultancy with the worst turnover in the entire world, because we lose 300 employees every 3 months, right? So, but I was looking at Backstage as a way to kind of, because we have projects that repeat, even though the students don't repeat, right?
Right.
So, so it would be really nice to have kind of like a landing place for these project definitions. And right now we have a mishmash of GitHub and Trello and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
And so what I was curious about is what was your experience with Backstage, or can you tell us a little bit more about it? And where do you know, or where are you interested in seeing it going? Because I think it's not a well-known.
I don't think it is well.
What is a piece of Kubernetes called? Like a sub project? I was looking for this word the other day and I couldn't think of it. Like a sub project
component.
Component. That was kind of what I was thinking.
Like Backstage is not Kubernetes, right? Like, I think
it's kind of CNCF in general.
It's a CNCF project that was released by Spotify originally,
right?
And like, I think their biggest thing, for me at least, is they just give folks like that are just, they don't need to care about the back end, right?
Yeah.
Like, they know that they're writing a Flutter app or Python, and they need a database, and they need all these components, and you just create those specific things how you want to run them within Backstage, and you just create these templates essentially. And I'm probably using the wrong language because I'm not super versed on the
I would say like the Kubernetes ecosystem, because it's the Kubernetes.
There you go.
And then you can bring up all your infrastructure, not only developers but also like a platform engineer. You can build up like a Backstage or the other CNCF project. It's all about Kubernetes ecosystem. So Kubernetes is not an option. It's a mandatory fundamental technology. That's how I would say that.
Yeah.
Well, and so kind of related, like, can I go click a button in AWS land and get a Backstage instance, or is this still pretty?
I haven't looked at the marketplace, to be honest with you, on that.
Okay. Sounds like a piece opportunity.
I know there's a company that is providing.
There is like a SaaS company, I think.
Which made me feel better about investing in it, because one of the problems with open source, right, is like if there's no company that is actively kind of making sure that it's kind of moving forward, sometimes they can die. And so you want to make sure that it's got some traction, and one of the ways to do that is see if you can find somebody who's willing to charge you money for it from a support perspective.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I know. So like the AWS marketplace is vast, So it would not surprise me if there's some vendor out there with a Backstage solution. I don't know that we're putting one together at AWS specifically on the ECAS team. Can Backstage do operators? Good question. I dropped a link for the plugins page that might.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, I'll drop it over
I
in
mean,
the chat.
that's always helpful for folks to kind of figure out what can I do with this tool. Does it support operators? It supports YAML, so yes.
Right.
I mean, and you can deploy whatever code you want through everything. The catalog that you create is essentially a bunch of work pieces that need to go together to make your thing happen, and that can include things like CI/CD and security scanning, and all those things that you would expect for your production enterprise app to go through. You can kind of plug all those things in, including monitoring, the whole 9 yards. You can do some cost estimations with it as well, which is great, right? Like you kind of get a better view from your console of the expensive things. But it integrates with so many different services. That plugins link will tell you everything, right? gRPC, Weaveworks, GitOps, you name it, it'll work with it pretty much, is what it seems like. And there's been that wide adoption of people contributing their plugin or whatever for Backstage. You even have one that'll like Lighthouse for Google. Like if you're doing web page front end releases, you can totally have that as part of your process before it goes out the door kind of thing, or your test queue, or however you want to set it up. It's essentially, I don't want to say it's like if this and that for Kubernetes, because it's definitely not that simple, but it's close, right? It's a great developer platform. So if you're a platform engineer, you need to create consistency. Backstage is an open source project that'll allow you to do that. It's pretty great. Oh, and you just shared a link in chat here, so yeah, I'll check it out. Oh yeah, look at that. Digital Alpha Platform, centralized software catalog for infrastructure, services, and documentation. Nice.
Oh, that sounds fancy.
It does sound fancy. It's an AMI-based Backstage application where a user can directly use the Backstage dashboard.
Yeah,
I just dropped that in the chat too. I also dropped the vendor who they were at. So they Backstage had kind of a project booth, but then there was also a vendor booth at KubeCon. And Roadie.io was the.
Oh, that's right. That's who they are. Yeah,
which, for Backstage is an awesome organization name. Thank you very much. So yeah, I thought it was really cool, and I didn't know, like, I have not heard very many people talk about it. So, if you're operating Kubernetes, it can be super handy. And
if you're
multiple
to help
projects,
a bunch of developers all at once, this could really be like, developer needs database, they can do it themselves per your specs, right? Like, we haven't had like Ansible can kind of do that, and from Red Hat land, it can kind of do that with Tower. But we haven't had like this open source solution until Backstage came along that were integrated directly with Kubernetes the way it does.
Right. I really liked actually the kind of the doc side of it was that, and the kind of like, here's all your links, right? Because right now I have a
everything you need to do to onboard. Here you go. Yeah,
right. The first card is like, here's all the links to where the docs are and where the GitHub is, and all that stuff. But this is much more of kind of an integrated interface. With that kind of takes you all there, which I thought was really slick.
I mean, this conversation might make me invest a little time in spinning up. I've got new hardware coming, shockingly. To remember the server that I had for all the old live streams way back in the day, where I would like burn down OpenShift clusters of all different variety. That is getting retired due to our power bill.
Okay,
I'm donating it to a nonprofit, so that'll go a long way for them. It's a great system, but it's just like overkill for somebody that works at a cloud provider. It has like 2 Xeon CPUs, 256 gigs of RAM, an insane amount of RAID 10 storage. It's a lot. I just need the storage part. So new parts and pieces are coming, but I do intend to stand up a small cluster on that system, maybe extend it to another piece of hardware I have in the house, and slap Backstage on it, because that'd be great if I could just glue some stuff together and have my fancy little app that I want to plug in from GitHub done. and
Yeah,
off it
well, for
goes.
me, that even like kind of on the personal front, like I'm really looking at it for, and hopefully I'll be getting a student to be standing it up this semester. We'll see how it goes. But even from kind of a personal perspective, it's like, my ability to kind of work on those personal projects is so erratic, right? From a timing
Yes.
perspective, just
Yeah.
having all that stuff in one place,
Mhm.
like that whole context switching problem of like, how do I get
Yeah.
back to the context for these little things I want to build, is super difficult. I'm hoping that Backstage might be able to help me with that.
Yeah, it's going to be the tool. Like if you're using Kubernetes as your platform, it's going to be the tool that you're going to want to grab if you need to help folks provision things on Kubernetes, right? Like standing up a database in Kubernetes isn't exactly trivial, right? So
Right.
having a template that does that for you in your own namespace kind of deal, a lot better. But that involves like storage and PVCs and all these other, components of Kubernetes that you have to kind of stand up to get a good, solid database running under Kubernetes. Because remember, this was all done for stateless workloads, and now we're doing state in it.
Right.
So state is hard, and I always
I
say
remember this thing.
databases are the hardest.
There was like this protocol, this hypertext thing,
Yeah.
that was also intended that way, and then all of a sudden went very stateful. It rings a bell. That seems to be what happens. So, Daniel, did you have more things you wanted to talk about, or?
No, it's good. It's good. Yeah. So, yeah, maybe just wondering. Yeah. So I mentioned a little bit earlier. So the CNCP Ambassador Program, there are some new era. So maybe you're gonna encourage people to join the new program. It actually we're gonna still open the application the middle of February. So yeah.
I am going there now and trying to find the ambassador page. But yes, CNCF ambassadors have been a thing for a long time. And George Castro from here in Michigan suggested I become one at my first KubeCon. And I applied and I got accepted. And it's been 5 years, but the group has just been ad only, not like reduction at all, right? Like there's no way to phase somebody out
Kind of
for
like driver's licenses.
emeritus. Yeah. Like it's like you just keep kicking the date down the road kind of thing. So twofold, they want to A, increase diversity, as we all do, and then B, fresh faces. There's a lot of new people in the Kubernetes space making great content. They've applied to be CNCF ambassadors, but they've never heard back because we have just so many, right? Like, and so many of them say, I'm working on this thing that might not be accurate. They might not be active. Jobs change, priorities change. It happens, right? So they've revamped the program so it's not in perpetuity you're a CNCF ambassador, because there is, some work involved. And, after 5 years of doing it, I would be okay with sitting out for a year and then reapplying for another year term. So they're kind of doing it in 2 phases. Everything's a year. Like you volunteer for a year of being a CNCF ambassador, and there's expectations and so forth, so on. But then, like, there's a group that's applying now, and then there's a group that'll apply later in the year. So you have some continuity there. Like there'll be like a 6-month period of where you'll have existing and then new ambassadors so they can get spun up. And there's, that level of community growth continues because now you can cycle people in and out as you see fit based on their skills and the needs and goals of the projects. It's pretty cool. And then they're even revamping the newsletter that I used to contribute to, which was Cube Weekly. So they want to make sure that, same kind of scenario. It's not just the same people providing updates to Cube Weekly every week, because that could get, a little monotonous, as you can imagine. So and it's a big burden on some people, right? Like putting together a newsletter every week. I did it for 6 years straight. It's not easy. And sourcing content for, tech newsletters is just a deluge of data coming in at all times. So yeah, the application window closes for the ambassador program on the 26th. Fall applications will open on in July, and they'll be announced, or you'll be notified in October. And Daniel, this says mid-March 2023 now, as for notification for the new ambassador program. So technically, I'm still an ambassador until I think they said Wednesday at KubeCon EU.
Yeah, so am I.
Yeah, so like I still feel like this semi obligation to keep covering, Kubernetes work, because that's the work I'm doing every day. But like I'm trying to figure out, what does it look like after 5 years not doing this? And it's going to be a change. Like if I don't get accepted, that kind of thing, that's fine. I've had a great run, learned a lot, met a lot of cool people, done a lot of great stuff. The evolution, I think, will be better overall for CNCF, because diversity of ideas and opinions is hard to gather unless you have a mechanism to do so. And this new mechanism is, I think, much more ready to bring in new people on a regular basis. And also it gives folks an exit, right? That's been the biggest thing in the Kubernetes community, I feel like, is, we have emeritus as a term that we use across the project, but each SIG has to have a method for doing that. And it's usually the same, right? Like somebody just volunteers and says, I'm not working on this anymore. But how many people actually do that, right? Like if you stop watching a TV show, do you tell the TV station? No. Right? Like,
Well,
if all of a sudden you change priorities at work, you're changing priorities at work. You're not necessarily worried about, unless you got PRs in flight kind of thing.
Well, it's also, it's super hard to actually step back, right? Because like, just because you announce that you're now emeritus, 50% of the community that was previously communicating with you about something didn't get the memo, right?
Yeah.
So it takes like 5 years, right? So, it's like, even if you're kind of stepping back from it a bit, it's a very difficult kind of scenario.
My biggest problem is that I have so many interests, right? Like I love physics. I love, cost optimization. I love all these things, right, that are kind of, cloud adjacent or tech adjacent. And somebody approached me at KubeCon, and I was kind of ready for the conversation, but not really. They're like, hey, we're trying to set up like an environmental sustainability group. Who do you know, or would you be interested in doing it? And it's like, I would love to be a part of it, but not leading it, right? Like, because I have all these other roles now. So if the ambassadorship falls off, maybe I could go pursue that, or maybe I could just take a break. Who knows? But yeah, like since we've last talked, Langdon, I've had to shut down my newsletter for health reasons, and all this other stuff's going on kind of in the background. So I wouldn't mind a break, to be honest with you. It's been hard to kind of unwind myself from all the things I used to do for my newsletter, because it used to just be, I would just work all the time. I'd work at Red Hat, I'd work at AWS, done with work for the day, have dinner with the family, and then just start reading. And I read till bedtime, because I'm reading all the tech news in my RSS reader.
Yeah.
Burning down your RSS feed every day is hard.
Right.
And if you, that was the thing. If you're running a newsletter, you can't share old news, right?
Yeah, right, exactly.
And just trim. Like my other problem with kind of news, especially tech news, right, is like you find an article and then it gets reposted with the exact same content in like 87 other places, and you keep coming across all those when you're actually looking for like new content. I did want to make a quick note before we wrap up, though, which is that if you are interested in the optimization stuff, I'm going to throw it in the chat. There's actually a student here, a PhD candidate here, who's been working on serverless optimization. So basically looking at, I have a workload, like a function, right? And I want to optimize where it's deployed based on cost in the various cloud providers. And I was going to throw one of his research papers in here.
I'd love to read it. Because
it's really interesting.
So like, I love Kubernetes because it gives everybody kind of the standard set of APIs, no matter where you are. So like your knowledge becomes transferable. It's not like you're at a, I'm a XYZ vendor shop. You can say, I'm a Kubernetes shop. And like, it's a bigger pool of people you can pull from now, as opposed to say like, oh yeah, we use Oracle Cloud or we use AWS. Actually, a lot of people use a lot of clouds, actually, is what we've come to learn over the years. So having Kubernetes there as kind of the standard API layer we all work through is liberating to an extent.
Yeah. I mean, vendor lock is a thing, right? And having a way to, because like it kind of goes both ways. It's not only like, I mean, do you really want to change providers all that much? Probably not.
Probably not.
Does it mean your pool of who you can hire it goes down? It's often my big concern. It's like, I want to have that openness, because I want to also be able to say, hey, I have standard tools that I can teach or that I can hire for, which is super nice.
The way I like to say it is, Linux did to computing what Kubernetes is doing to cloud.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
I would agree. Yeah. This is why I was really interested in Delta Cloud 10 plus years ago.
Wow, that was a long run.
Yeah.
I was talking about SCSI terminators earlier this morning with a friend on social media.
Yeah, that'll teach you. Speaking of dating yourself, but it was a project way back in the day to try to kind of genericize the cloud access.
And we've had multiple projects like this. This is not like Kubernetes is a new idea. It's just a new implementation of an idea, right? Like we had OpenStack, which a lot of folks still use. Great tool, but if you were standing up OpenStack, like I was at Duke Research, for example, and we were talking about standing up OpenStack as a 2-year project, right? Like that's a lot of effort. And then like create that environment on a dev laptop. Good luck.
Right. Yeah. Well, so on that note, before we go off on some other tangent, thank you so much for being on the show. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for the invite.
It's always nice to see
happy. Yeah, likewise.
Yeah. And hopefully, will you be at KubeCon EU in general?
Hope so.
Hope so. Yeah.
The general plan right now is to be there.
Right.
Unless something changes. Yeah. There's a lot of time between now and April.
Exactly. Well, maybe I will see you there, because I'm in the same boat. I'm hopeful that we'll be going there, and we'll be maybe doing some more interviews in cars. We'll see how it goes.
That'd be fun.
Which will be entertaining.
Who's the big European car maker?
There's a number of them. But we were thinking maybe an Audi.
That'd be lovely.
Yes, I like Audis a lot. But we'll see what happens. There was somebody who volunteered to provide their Porsche, like on a personal level.
Wow. Okay.
But I'm not sure if that would fit with all the cameras and the people and
I mean, it would definitely be a squeeze for me.
Right. So we'll see how it goes. But thanks everyone for coming. We are always excited to have everyone here, and catch us up at it's the last Tuesday of the month is the show. We will, like I said, hopefully be at KubeCon. We have lots of content at cubebyexample.com or is it .com?
Pretty sure.
Now I just got
okay.
Just had a moment there, so go check it out, and and there's lots of past episodes there as well, and we're always excited to see y'all. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks.